되기 때문에 더 사람들에게 각광받고 있는 공간이지 않을까 생각됩니다.
Today, the multi-use building attracts many visitors, but in its former days, it processed the city's waste by incinerating it. Its daily processing capacity was 200 tons of waste.
안타깝게도 여기 이 쓰레기를 소각을 하다 보면 다이옥신이 발생될 수밖에 없었던 환경이 있었습니다. 근데 이런 다이옥신이라는 것이 당시만 해도 사람들이 좀 잘 몰랐었고 그러다 보니까 그냥 진행됐었는데 97년도에 이제 환경부에서 일기 신도시에서 이제 만들어진 쓰레기 소각장들의 이제 다이옥신 농도들을 이제 검사하기 시작하게 됩니다. 또 안타깝게도 이 부천의 이 쓰레기 소각장은 당시만 해도 가장 다이옥신 농도가 높았던 걸로 결과가 나왔고 그로 인해서 주민들이 그 사실을 알고서 반발을 했었던 거죠.
Dioxin levels exceeded safety limits by 20 times. When this news spread, the residents were incensed. Protests demanding the shuttering of the waste incineration plant became violent.
우리 동네는 우리가 지킨다 해갖고 이제 쓰레기를 우리는 줄여야 되겠다. 태워야 될 거, 안 태워야 될 거 이런 걸 줄이기로 해갖고 쓰레기 줄이기 운동을 먼저 했지.
협재 사무실이라고 있었어. 거기서 매일같이 그 8명 매일같이 거기서 회의를 하는 거야. 어떻게 하자 이렇게 했는데 이제 그게 결과가 성과를 거둔 거지 이제.
Discussions were held between the city and civic groups to transform the abandoned plant in a way that not only preserved its history, but also served a new purpose.
이 공간은 사람을 위한 공간이 아니었고 거의 그냥 기계를 위한 공간이었어요. 예, 그래서 사람의 활동 공간이나 동선들을 어떻게 만들지, 그다음에 그 동선을 만들면서 소각의 과정들을 여전히 사람들이 조금 느낄 수 있게 해주고 싶었고 그런 부분들을 어떻게 배열할지 이런 게 이제 가장 큰 고민이었습니다.
And it resulted in the Bucheon Art Bunker B39, a space where people can interact, connect, and be creative, where at one time trash was burned. Artists were invited to showcase their art. Bucheon Art Bunker B39 has been completely transformed into a multi-use space attuned to the local arts and culture scene. The number 39 in the building's new name is a reference to the height of the plant, which stood 39 meters high. The artistic aspect of the place today blends in harmony with the old structure. The planners turned the storage bunker into the main theme of the building. When looking around the structure, visitors will be struck by its vast proportions. As the concrete slab structure is largely intact and left exposed, you might expect fumes to rise from the dormant plant.
지금은 이 공간이 오히려 예술가들에게 작업을 할 수 있게끔 매우 최적의 공간으로서 오히려 각광받고 있고, 부천은 아트벙커 비사무의 이 B자는 여러 중의적인 의미가 있습니다만 부천의 비도 있고 그리고 벙커의 비도 있지만 또 하나는 보더레스, 경계가 없다라는 뜻도 있거든요. 그러니까 경계가 없는 다양한 문화를 가지고 사업을 해보고 이것들을 이제 시민과 예술가들의 문화 교류지로서 활용을 해보겠다라는 차원으로 이해하시는 게 맞을 듯 싶습니다.
The worn iron gates stand as a testament to the work that took place here. One gate now serves as a door that leads to the bunker bridge. The indoor bridge links one area to the building to the first floor and also gives visitors a top view of art displays.
지금 이 플로어는 없었어요, 원래. 근데 이제 제가 설계를 해서 이 벙커 브릿지라는 걸 만든 거고, 그러므로 해서 지금 이 멀티미디어 홀하고 그다음에 저기 보이는 저 문 너머에 있는 더 큰 공간들하고 이렇게 동선이 연결이 되게 된 겁니다. 그래서 동선을 이동하는 과정에서도 이 공간을 경험할 수 있고, 이 소리가 공명이 잘 돼가지고 이 소리도 굉장히 인상적이어서 어떤 음악 그 행사나 그런 것들도 많이 열리고 있습니다.
Visitors can take a staircase down to the ground floor. The atypical exhibition space creates a unique atmosphere for the artworks on display. Artists have used Ipchun art bunker B39 to push the boundaries of their experimental art. It also serves as a space where visitors and artists alike can share and appreciate the arts and culture.
어색함은 잠시야 달콤함은 긴 시간 그저 기분 좋은 음악에 몸을 맡겨 너와 내가 두 손 잡고 사람들 속으로 달려들어
A place in the city where visitors can unwind. This cultural center nourishes the soul as well.
저는 지하 공간이요. 지하 공간. 사실 평소에 그런 공간을 일반인들이 쉽게 접근할 수 없는 공간인데 작품을 보기 위해서 몸으로 움직여가면서 이렇게 들어가 보는 그런 경험이 사실 일상에서 쉽지 않은데 이런 공간들이 계속 살아남아 있음으로써 그런 경험을 준다는 것도 네, 되게 좋은 것 같아요.
The repurposed incinerator shows a clever design. One wall section has been torn down and replaced with glass windows, letting sunlight in. Another wall looks like a blocky sentry robot. It was formerly the old incinerator, the workhorse of the plant. Again, the planners kept this structure largely intact. In its heyday, it burned hundreds of tons of waste a day. The dark patches of soot hint at the building's past.
이 지금 보이시는 이 중정도 실내 공간이었고 여기가 그 쓰레기를 태우는 거대한 그 보일러가 있던 곳이거든요. 그래서 굉장히 음산하고 조금 무서운 느낌까지도 들 정도로 그런 곳이었는데 또 그게 갖는 어떤 대단한 흡입력이 있었던 것 같아요. 그러니까 좀 사람을 이렇게 빨아들이는 마력 같은 거?
The atrium welcomes visitors with its particular look. 3 stories high, it allows for views from different angles. With its distinct design, it is also the most favorite place among visitors.
인공적으로 재현하거나 만들어낼 수 없는 모습들을 시간이 흐름으로 해서 자연적으로 만들어진 어떤 이 현상들을 그대로 노출되어서 볼 수 있다는 것이 장점이고, 오히려 이런 부분들이 젊은 관객들 혹은 작가들한테 어필돼서 젊은 사람들에겐 이렇게 많이 유명해졌고, 또 작가들에겐 이런 또 독특한 공간들이 자기 어떤 창작 열의를 좀 돋구는 어떤 형태의 공간의 특성이라고 볼 수 있을 것 같습니다.
Through the artworks, the place connects people and the city, fostering a vibrant culture. Ipchun Art Bunker B39 stands as one big objet d'art, creating value with its diverse collection of works.
유인송풍실이라고 그러니까 정화된 연기를 유인을 해가지고 굴뚝으로 뽑아 올리는 그런 설비들이 있는 실입니다. 이런 여러 가지 그 설비들이 저 위에 높은 공간까지 연결이 되고요. 그래서 이제 흥미로운 공간이라고 생각을 하고, 그래서 기존 시설하고 함께 이렇게 오고 가며 공간적 변화를 느낄 수 있게 그렇게 의도를 했습니다.
Most of the plant's original structure carries through today with some alterations. The pollution control chamber is one such case. The dioxins emitted from this chamber were the reason the facility was shuttered.
기존의 공간하고 새로운 공간하고 만나는 부분들을 많이 만들려고 하는 것 중에 하나였고, 그 유인송풍실이라는 공간의 설비나 이런 것들이 여러 개 층에 걸쳐서 그게 올라가게 돼 있어요. 그래서 이제 그 공간에 들어가면 2층에도 뭔가 어렴풋이 사람들이 왔다 갔다 하는 모습들이 보여지고, 그 다음에 그 설비 자체가 또 특징적이기 때문에 그 공간에서 아티스트들이 전시들을 많이 했어요. 그래서 굉장히 다른 성격의 전시 공간이 함께 있는 그런 공간이라고 보시면 돼요.
The area gives off dystopian vibes, but also charming in a way. There is a condensate tank room that still takes up the 3rd floor. The maze of equipment is quite elaborate. Such spaces give inspiration to artists, and others are used as a performance stage.
유일무이하죠. 그러니까 아우라가 있다라고 저는 생각이 들어요. 그러니까 이런 공간은 어디서 만들기도 힘들고, 사실 만든다 하더라도 제작 비용이라든지 이런 것들이 굉장히 많이 들겠죠. 그렇지만 이게 이제 시간이 흐르면서 자연적으로 부식된 어떤 철의 질감들은 사실 인공적으로 그거는 좀 재현하기는 어렵거든요. 근데 여기는 그런 어떤 그 세월이 흘러서 철제들이 부식되어 가고, 그리고 페인트들이 이렇게 벗겨지는 모습들이 그 자체로도 남아서 그 자체가 그냥 사람들에게 많은 또 영감을 주고 효과를 좀 발현되는 곳이지 않을까 싶습니다.
The control room of the old incinerator plant is clean and well maintained, despite not being operational. It looks like a museum exhibit after it was repurposed as a space where visitors can see the history of the building. Yet another remnant from the past that has been preserved.
너무 좋았어요. 옛날에 저희가 이제 소각장이란 자체를 어떻게 보면 볼 수가 없잖아요. 근데 이런 공간을 다시 한번 재탄생해서 만들어서 못 본 세대가 많으니까 한 번쯤 와서 이런 공간도 있었다는 거를 좀 알게 되고 거기에서 이제 막 느낌도 받고 좋은 느낌 받고 좀 신선했어요. 아주.
Visitors see the old walls and floors as places that evoke old memories, making them more than just a cultural space.
처음에는 이런 것들을 봤을 땐 이게 뭐지? 라고 사람들이 좀 특이하게 생각을 하죠. 그 공간뿐만 아니라 여기 이 공간 전체가 가지는 특성이 과거에 있었던 흔적들을 최대한 보존하는 형태였습니다. 그러다 보니까 그 공간을 그냥 날 것 그대로 좀 살려놓은 상태고 오히려 그 공간에서 사람들이 평소에는 그냥 오셔서 관람을 하는데 이 공간이 좀 되게 특이하네? 라는 어떤 느낌을 받을 수 있는 공간이기도 하고 또 작품을 전시할 때는 그 공간에 맞춰서 또 작가들이 작품들을 변형해서 또 전시를 하기도 합니다. 그 자체로서 또 매력을 가지는 좀 매우 좀 특징적인 공간이라고 할 수 있을 것 같습니다.
Abandoned buildings may seem to be no longer useful. However, repurposing them to serve the city's residents can breathe new life into a place that was cast away.
예전에 소각장 시설이 없어진 게 아니라 뼈들이든지 기본적인 부분들은 다 남아있거든요. 그거를 보면서 느낀 바가 많았고 이렇게 전시물로 어쨌든 폐 소각장이 문화 전시가 돼서 이렇게 활용되고 있다는 것 자체만으로도 많은 의미가 있다고 생각합니다.
Ipchun Art Bunker B39 has put its controversial past behind it to re-emerge as a successful project jointly undertaken by the city and civic groups. Listening to suggestions from the residents was a significant factor in completing the project. And those inputs from the public have made the place a platform for fostering the arts and culture.
2010년도에만 해도 우리가 젊었으니까 놀이공간으로 하겠다는데 어떤 때는 행사할 때 보면 젊은 애들이 많이 오고 애기들 데리고 많이 오는 거 보면 잘했다 싶어.
저도 지금 하고 있지만 라인 댄스하고 요가하고 공예하고 이제 동네 어르신들이 조그맣게 조금씩 이제 더 넓혀갈 거지 이제 지금 하고 있어요.
To attract more locals, Ipchun Art Bunker B39 offers educational classes with the purpose of reaching out to the community. Many of the available programs empower participants to be more creative.
저도 캘리그라피 작가인데 인사동에서만 했었어요. 근데 요번에 지난 한 일주일 전에 여기서 개인전을 했거든요. 우리가 이 예술 마을로 바뀌어가는 것 같아요. 문화공간으로. 그런 우리 마을을 위한 그런 장소로 쓰이니까 너무 좋아하시죠. 네. 그래서 맨날 웃으시고 건강도 좋아지시는 것 같아요.
Bringing people together in a space like this helps to support the local cultural scene and enrich people's lives.
과거와 현재가 끊기지 않고 이어졌다는 거예요. 우리가 그 소각장이 그냥 싹 사라지고 그냥 새로운 건물을 졌다면은 아마 기억 속에서 사라질 텐데 우리가 그렇게 이 소각장 때문에 가슴앓이를 하고 그랬는데 그거를 이제 이어서 살리면서 또 우리 문화시설까지 함께 이렇게 접목이 돼가지고 더 과거와 현재가 공존해서 좋죠.
An artsy cultural space that embraces the past and future. In Ipchun Art Bunker B39, under its renewed mission, people can find an escape from the daily grind to immerse themselves in fulfilling creative pursuits.
저희가 만든 슬로건이 있습니다. 그 슬로건은 다시 활활, 예술로 뜨겁게라는 이름인데, 이 활활은 다들 아시겠지만 여기가 소각장에서 쓰레기를 태웠던 곳이잖아요. 그것을 이제 활활하겠다는 뜻인 거고, 예술가들의 작품들을 마음껏 펼칠 수 있는 공간. 그래서 저희는 시민과 예술가들이 만나는 문화 교류지로서 이곳이 다시 뜨겁게 활활 타올라서 예술로서 이 시민들이 많은 향유뿐만 아니라 예술가들이 함께 참여하는 복합 문화 공간으로, 그리고 경계가 없는 공간으로 만들고 싶다라는 바람이 있습니다.
Such a new undertaking of renewal is a natural phenomenon in a way. Here, it is taken one step further with sustainability being another important theme. Ipchun Art Bunker B39's mission is to serve the people by fostering a new culture. Here's wishing that the place will stay around to benefit the lives of citizens.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right.
다음 중 한국의 전통 의상은 무엇일까요? 그렇다면 한국의 전통 의상 이름은 무엇일까요?
정답은 한복입니다. 안녕하세요. 방크 청년연구원 이정우입니다. 한국 드라마와 한국 영화가 한류 팬들에게 사랑받으면서 한국 전통 의상인 한복도 주목받고 있는데요. 한국 문화 콘텐츠가 지구촌 곳곳에서 인기를 누리면서 한국과 관련된 잘못된 정보도 확산되고 있습니다. 그중에는 한복에 관한 오류 정보도 있더라고요. 제가 여러분께 한복에 대해 제대로 알려드릴게요. 곡선과 직선이 조화롭게 이루어진 한복은 단아함과 우아함이 살아있는 한국 전통 의상입니다. 또한 1600년간 이어진 고유 한복은 세계에서 제일 길며 그것은 고구려 고분 벽화와 신라 백제 유물로도 확인이 됩니다. 한국인의 정체성과 역사가 담긴 한국의 소중한 문화유산이라 할 수 있죠.
널 알게 된 순간부터 내 머릿속엔 온통 너뿐이야. 항상 널 웃게 해줄게. 오랫동안 느껴왔어.
한국 바로 알리기 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
떨어지는 우리 딱 알겠어.
The Korean wave is drawing more fans from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% since rate in April. Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million using its locally developed Yuri rocket.
Arirang.
Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Top diplomats of South Korea and the United States met in Washington, D.C. to discuss tariff issues as well as the implementation of agreements outlined in the joint summit fact sheet signed by the two countries' leaders in November. President Lee Jae-myung has urged authorities to use all available measures to rein in high housing prices in the capital area. The government plans to end the grace period for the heavy capital gains tax on multiple homeowners, as scheduled on May 9th, with no additional extension. The United States says it shot down an Iranian drone that approached an American aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea. This comes as the U.S. continues to build up a military presence in the region, amid heightened tensions between Washington and Tehran, and as the two countries prepare to resume nuclear talks in Istanbul this week. We begin this morning with a meeting between the South Korean foreign minister and his U.S. counterpart in Washington, as Seoul works to reverse the U.S. tariff hikes on Korean products. Foreign Minister Cho vowed to quickly implement the terms of the trade and investment deal agreed when the two countries' leaders met late last year. Our Park Jun-an starts us off.
South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun met with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio at a closed-door meeting in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday. This comes as the Korean government seeks to resolve issues after U.S. President Donald Trump warned that tariffs on Korea would be hiked from 15% to 25%, citing delays in the National Assembly's passage of legislation needed to implement last November's bilateral trade and investment deal. After the meeting, South Korea's foreign ministry said that Minister Cho Hyun urged Secretary Rubio that there will be swift and substantive implementation of the November joint fact sheet, especially in nuclear energy, nuclear power submarines, and shipbuilding. He also explained Seoul's efforts on tariff agreements and U.S.-bound investments and proposed continued diplomatic support for smooth trade talks. Both ministers agreed to implement security commitments to build positive momentum and maintain close coordination on North Korea issues and regional stability. The U.S. State Department also released a statement emphasizing the enduring strength of the two countries' alliance and said both sides discussed advancing bilateral cooperation through a forward-looking agenda aligned with recent summits between Presidents Trump and Yi. Secretary Rubio also thanked Korea for its leadership in developing secure, resilient, and diversified critical minerals supply chains. The most recent round of high-level diplomatic talks followed visits to Washington by Korea's industry and trade ministers, who met with U.S. counterparts including U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, without resolution. The deployment of high-level trade figures to the U.S. reflects the deep concerns in Korea over tariffs, which could disrupt operations at Korean companies. 박준환, Arirang News.
The Korean government has made it official that there will be no further extensions to the temporary tax break for multiple homeowners beyond May 9, though a grace period of up to 6 months may be granted in certain cases, given the tight deadline. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Employing all available tools to tamp down high home prices in the capital area. That was the key message from President Lee Jae-myung at Tuesday's weekly cabinet meeting, as he also called for thorough measures.
대한민국의 부동산 이 문제는 정말 이 사회 발전을 통째로 가로막는 아주 암적인 문제가 됐어요. 부동산 거래하는 사람이 나쁘다는 얘기 아닙니다. 그건 시스템이 사회가 그렇게 허용하니까 그렇게 하는 거예요. 정책의 신뢰, 안정성이 꼭 담보돼야 되겠다.
The administration plans to end the grace period for the heavy capital gains tax on multiple homeowners as scheduled on May 9th, with no additional extension. Given the tight deadline, the government is looking to allow the temporary tax break to stay in place for up to 6 months for homeowners who signed a contract before or on the deadline.
For 3 areas in Gangnam as well as Seongsan, we are reviewing a grace period of up to 3 months so that people can settle final payments or conclude ownership registration. For newly designated speculative zones, up to 6 months.
The president appears to have in mind those who oppose or compare home prices with stock prices, urging that a distinction be made between an investment that helps the economy and one that harms it, in particular, people who don't have a home.
집값과 주가를 같은 선상에 놓고 판단하면 안 된다. 저는 이게 좀 모르면 그런 생각을 할 수도 있는데 최소한 사회의 지도적 입장에 있는 사람들이 그렇게 얘기를 하거나 또는 그런 식으로 선동하는 것은 참 옳지 않다.
Home prices have been the main topic in a series of recent social media posts by the president, showing his strong determination to address the chronic issue that is often deemed sensitive. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
South Korea's foreign reserves declined for the second consecutive month in January as authorities continued efforts to stabilize the weakening Korean won amid rising exchange rate pressures. The Bank of Korea said this morning that reserves stood at $425.91 billion at the end of January, down $2.15 billion from December. The central bank mainly attributed the drop to market stabilization measures, including foreign exchange swaps with the National Pension Service. This follows December's decrease of $2.6 billion, which marked the first decline in 7 months after 6 straight months of gains. As of late December, South Korea ranked 9th globally for foreign reserves. Protests have been continuing across the United States against President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown and following the fatal shootings of civilians by federal agents in Minnesota. For more on this, we're joined today by Chris Casquejo, an independent journalist in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good to be with you.
So these anti-ICE protests have been intensifying across the country recently. How are people responding to the immigration crackdown, and what have you been seeing on the ground in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, the protests have been growing in scale and scope, with hundreds of demonstrations held across the country in recent days. This includes marches, walkouts, and calls for general strikes, showing that this issue, this immigration crackdown, is resonating far beyond traditional anti-immigration enforcement activists In Washington, D.C. here, the protests have been focused and symbolic, taking place on Capitol Hill and outside federal buildings. The mood is very urgent, with many protesters saying immigration enforcement now feels very personal and disruptive to daily life.
I see. And journalists were arrested for federal civil rights violations while covering the anti-ICE protest at a church in Minnesota. Some are calling this media censorship. What's your take on this? And are journalists facing more obstacles under the Trump administration?
Yeah, this incident involving the two journalists at the anti-ICE protest at the church has really become a flashpoint for press freedom concerns here in the United States. Journalist and former CNN anchor Don Lemon said that a dozen federal agents arrested him despite his offer to surrender voluntarily. But authorities contend that this arrest of Lemon and another journalist were about disrupting a religious service and not about them practicing journalism. Now, press advocates warned that this risks criminalizing protest coverage and creating a chilling effect where it will discourage journalists from documenting what's going on and also citizens from documenting what's going on. More broadly, journalists covering immigration and protests are definitely facing increased legal and physical obstacles. We've seen several reports and instances of the local reporters in Minnesota getting tear gassed while covering these protests.
I see. And how visible is ICE activity in everyday life for people living in immigrant communities in the United States? How is it affecting the daily lives of Americans?
Yeah, it really depends on which city you're talking about. For example, in Minnesota, where this immigration enforcement operation is continuing, ICE activity has become highly visible, occurring in neighborhoods near workplaces and routine daily activities like Home Depots, other stores like that, and also schools, which is where immigration and authorities took in Liam Ramos, the 5-year-old who was recently released with his father from a detention center in Texas. Now, immigrant families report changing daily routines, avoiding schools, hospitals, and other public places out of fear. Even U.S. citizens in so-called mixed status families are affected. A mixed status family is a household where family members have different immigration statuses, often one of the family members being undocumented, while somebody else in the household is a U.S. citizen. Now, this impact extends way beyond arrest to widespread disruption of community life in places like Minnesota and Chicago, where the enforcement was happening just several weeks ago.
And what do you think is driving the administration to double down on immigration enforcement right now?
Well, immigration remains a key issue for President Donald Trump's base. The administration frames this as a law and order push and enforcement of existing laws. And officials appear determined not to back down in response to these protests. But at the same time, mounting scrutiny is shaping how enforcement is carried out. For example, authorities, the Department of Homeland Security announced that they would equip the officers with body cameras in Minnesota for the Border Patrol agents and ICE agents there, a step that supporters say could improve accountability, but the critics note that this is limited in scope to the Minnesota operation. Now, taken all together, this suggests that the administration is trying to hold the line on enforcement while making some tactical adjustments, increasing the transparency while reducing their legal risks without changing the underlying immigration enforcement policy because of some of the optics. There were 2 people who were shot in Minneapolis for observing and encountering these officers.
All right, where do you see this heading? Is there any chance we'll see a possible shift in the Trump administration's immigration policy?
Short term, I don't think you will. I mean, they've announced that they are going to expand this immigration crackdown to other cities like Springfield, Ohio. But public opinion is moving, so that is something to watch. Watch the polls. Recent Reuters and Ipsos polling shows that a majority of Americans now disapprove of how immigration enforcement is being handled, with approval well below 40%. even among the voters who supported President Trump's tougher border controls, there's growing concern that the enforcement tactics have gone too far, especially when it comes to use of force and transparency. Remember, in the case of the shooting of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, the administration had called them domestic terrorists and said that they had brandished weapons, or she had run into the officers, where the video showed otherwise, and that was not the case. For Donald Trump, immigration remains a core political issue, so a sudden shift is unlikely. But as we move closer to the November midterms that are going to decide the control of Congress, you might see a shift in public opinion, sustained public pressure, increased scrutiny from the courts, and the politics will play all into that. So we'll just have to see how it all plays out with all these factors involved.
I see. I guess we'll have to see how that goes. All right. Thank you so much for your time and insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to be with you again.
A U.S. fighter jet has shot down an Iranian drone near an American aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea as tensions with Tehran remain high. The incident comes just days before the U.S. and Iran are set to resume nuclear talks in Istanbul. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
The U.S. military says it has shot down an Iranian drone that approached one of its aircraft carriers in the Arabian Sea, in the latest sign of rising tensions between Washington and Tehran. According to U.S. Central Command, the incident happened on Tuesday when an Iranian Shahed 139 drone flew toward the USS Abraham Lincoln with what officials described as unclear but aggressive intent. The drone was ultimately downed by an F-35C fighter jet operating from the carrier. A spokesperson for U.S. Central Command said the action was taken in self-defense to protect the ship and its crew, stressing that the drone's approach posed a potential threat. The encounter comes at a sensitive diplomatic moment. Iran and the U.S. are preparing to resume nuclear talks in Istanbul on Friday, as both sides attempt to revive negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. U.S. President Donald Trump has signaled a tough stance ahead of those talks. He warned that with American warships moving closer to Iran, bad things would probably happen if no agreement is reached. The deployment of the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group has expanded Washington's military presence in the region and increased the president's range of options should tensions escalate. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed skepticism about Tehran's intentions. In talks with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff on Tuesday, Netanyahu said Iran has repeatedly shown that its promises cannot be trusted and suggested any future deal should be viewed cautiously. Observers say the upcoming talks in Istanbul could be critical in determining whether tensions ease or move closer to confrontation. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
More than 11,000 people became naturalized South Korean citizens last year, the highest level since 2020. According to data from the Justice Ministry this morning, 11,344 out of 18,623 applicants acquired Korean nationality between January and December. Naturalizations previously peaked at 13,885 in 2020, but fell to about 10,000 in 2021 and 2022, before rising again in 2023 and 2024. By nationality, Chinese citizens made up the largest share at 56.5%, the highest since the pandemic. They were followed by Vietnam, the Philippines, and Thailand. And South Korea marked Korean Sign Language Day this Tuesday, the 10th anniversary of Korean Sign Language being declared the country's official language for the hearing impaired. Members of the deaf community gathered to celebrate the occasion. Our Chung Il-im was there.
Here at the Modu Arts Theater in Seodaemun-gu, Seoul, people communicate with more than just spoken words. Members of the deaf community gathered on February 3rd, designated as Korean Sign Language Day to celebrate the event's 6th annual commemoration. This year is particularly significant as it marks the 10th anniversary of the Korean Sign Language Act, a law that elevated KSL to an official language. Held under the slogan, "Today connected by language, tomorrow connected by culture," the event highlighted the beauty of visual language. The ceremony featured poem recitals by the sign language arts group and award recipients Sign Mindle, followed by awards for those who have dedicated themselves to the development of KSL. Instead of the sound of clapping, the hall was filled with silent applause as attendees waved their hands in the air, the traditional gesture of acclaim in the community. One award recipient highlighted the power of language in restoring connection with loved ones.
One of my students had a deaf family member they couldn't really talk to, but after learning sign language, they told me that communication finally opened up, and now they even video call each other.
The ceremony continued with more festive performances, including songs by a deaf community-based music band, Deaf Vengers. While National Assembly member Park Hong-gun emphasized South Korea's efforts to embed KSL interpretation in areas such as welfare and entertainment during a speech, leaders of the community say challenges remain.
사실 많은 기관에서 언어법이 제정된 이후로 많은 통역이 제공이 되어 있는 것은 같습니다. 하지만 아직도 현장에서는 적용이 많이 안 되고 있는 듯한 모습도 많이 보이고요. 사실 10년이라는 시간에 비해서는 아직은 조금 더 발전의 속도가 여전히 더디다는 생각이 좀 많이 드는 것 같습니다. 가장 시급한 문제는 사실 수어 사용 환경에 좀 실질적인 확대가 좀 많이 필요하다고 생각이 듭니다. 또 언어권 보장 그리고 디지털 미디어 환경에서 좀 다양하게 수업 접근성이 강화되었으면 좋겠다는 생각이 듭니다.
That just meant congratulations on Korean Sign Language Day. Celebrating 10 years of the KSL Act, we imagine a future where language is no longer a barrier, but a connection. 정혜림, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. President Donald Trump on Tuesday signed a massive $1.2 trillion government funding package into law, ending the 4-day partial government shutdown that began last Saturday. The U.S. House passed the bill 217 to 214 earlier on Tuesday after the Senate approved it last Friday. The package funds almost all of the federal government through the end of September, but puts the Department of Homeland Security on a 2-week stopgap that expires on February 13th. Lawmakers now face a short window to negotiate a longer DHS deal as Democrats push for changes after federal agents fatally shot 2 people in Minneapolis last month. Former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton have agreed to testify later this month in a congressional investigation into late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer confirmed on Tuesday that the Clintons will sit for transcribed filmed depositions on February 26th and 27th. The agreement effectively pauses a looming contempt of Congress vote that could have led to criminal charges against the couple. NASA has delayed its mission to fly astronauts around the moon after hydrogen leaks disrupted a fueling test. Engineers at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida detected the leaks during a wet dress rehearsal, a final pre-launch simulation of the massive Space Launch System rocket. This technical failure forced launch controllers to halt the countdown with just 5 minutes remaining. The delay pushes the launch date back to at least March 6th. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has announced plans to ban social media for children under the age of 16 to combat, quote, the digital Wild West. Speaking at the World Government Summit in Dubai on Tuesday, Sanchez also vowed to introduce legislation that would hold tech executives criminally liable for failing to remove harmful or illegal content and would criminalize manipulating algorithms to amplify illegal content. The proposal still needs parliamentary approval, with the legislation process set to begin next week.
Today marks Ipchun, the seasonal turning point that signals the start of spring. And right on cue, temperatures are climbing, bringing milder than average weather to most parts of Korea. However, as the cold briefly eases, fine dust levels are becoming a concern. Air quality will be bad today in Seoul, Gyeonggi-do, and Chungcheong-Pukdo provinces all day today. Meanwhile, dry weather alerts remain in place for the eastern parts of Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-do provinces. Strong winds along the east coast will increase wildfire risk, so extra caution with fire safety is essential. And this afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 7 degrees Celsius. Daegu, Gyeongju, Gwangju all topping out at 11 degrees Celsius. Well, spring may be trying to make an early appearance today, but winter is not quite done with us yet. Freezing air will return on Friday, and it will stay bitterly cold through early next week, with a winter mix in the forecast for Jeju and Jeollado province.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe. K-pop, K-drama, K-movie, K-food, and even K-beauty. Korean cultural content is gaining more and more fans worldwide. It's indeed the golden age of K-culture. But with this growing interest comes an increase in misinformation about Korea. There's so much inaccurate information out there. Even AI can sometimes get it wrong. So, we must set things straight and correct all the misinformation. So here's the plan. The Voluntary Agency Network of Korea, VANK, and Arirang TV present the Get Korea Right project. Our goal is to provide accurate information on important keywords that come to mind when we think of Korea. Blatant errors and false claims that distort history. It's time to set the record straight, sharing the true history and culture of Korea while raising the national brand. Let's get started with Get Korea Right. Are you ready to join?
We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Wednesday, February 4th here in Seoul. I'm Ipchun, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Cheska.
Happy Wednesday, everyone.
Happy Wednesday. Also, Wonbing's with us. Good morning. And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So as we head into the middle of the week, it's a moment to check in on how we live day to day. And interestingly, both of our panelists today are living alone as one-person households. So living on your own comes with a lot of freedom, but also a lot to think about. From safety to loneliness, from daily routines to unexpected emergencies, there's always something on your mind. So Cheska, let me ask you this. What's the one thing you're afraid of when it comes to living alone?
Sujin, I can't just tell you one thing. There is a list of things, and I've lived alone for about 7-8 years now. So
I see.
I actually have a list of things that I'm always afraid of, or at least is on my mind. I mean, to start with the basics, bugs. Pests,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Sudden appearance of roaches, God forbid.
A very relatable one.
Very scary, but also something very important as security and privacy, because as a girl living alone, I think these are some of the most important issues. But also medical emergencies, because sometimes if something as small as like choking on a food were to happen, it's very difficult to perform a Heimlich on your own,
right?
Or like call an emergency service. So these are some of the things that come up, and also existential crisis. I think solitude sometimes hits really hard, but you look around the room and you realize you're the only one there to solve the problem. So sometimes those hit really hard too, yeah.
So since you've been living alone for 8 years, do you have any like systems in place to help you deal with those situations?
That's a really good question, because now that you mention it, I realize I actually don't. Which I think is really important, because as a young people, we don't think about those emergencies as being so prominent.
Right.
So I don't think we have those in place as much. So I think it is really important. Yeah, I actually don't.
Right, especially for medical emergencies. You think about it, but you don't think it's actually going to happen to you.
Exactly. So maybe that is what we should talk about today. Yeah.
Right. So what about you, Wonbing?
It's similar with Cheska, because I'm still statistically on the younger side of the demographic. I don't have that many concerns or serious concerns at the moment. But the problem is when I get older. So, you know, something that is simple and something that's not a risk to us, to people who are in their 20s, 30s, and even 40s, can be an uncertainty or something unsafe for the seniors and the elderly. For example, you know, slippery bathroom floors, or cooking and forgetting to turn off the stove once you're done. And another big concern that I have for living alone is isolation and loneliness. It could lead to lonely death, so that's a worry that I have for the future as well.
So I think all of this is really an honest take, and it shows how concerns can change as we age, and that highlights how loneliness can be just as dangerous as physical risks. So we're going to talk more about this, but first, let's take a look at the screen. As one-person households continue to rise, living alone is becoming a new normal for many. For some, it represents freedom and independence, but for others, it can mean isolation and silence. And for some, that isolation leads to a growing social concern: lonely deaths, cases in which individuals pass away alone. On today's News Generation, we examine why lonely deaths are increasing, the prevention measures already in place, and what more can be done to better protect those at risk. So as we just saw in the video, concerns are growing about lonely deaths as the number of one-person households continues to rise. And different countries are responding in different ways. But before we dive more into this, Cheska, can you tell us what lonely deaths are and any unique or notable prevention efforts that stand out to you?
So first of all, a lonely death refers to a situation where someone passes away alone and remains undiscovered for a long period of time. Now, while this issue has often been associated with the elderly, now it also includes, as we'll talk about in today's episode, young people living alone as well, especially in large cities like Seoul, where social isolation is growing. Now, overseas, there have been some notable prevention efforts. For example, in China, there's a mobile app literally called Are You Alive? And what it does, it has gained popularity because users are actually required to check in every 2 days to confirm if they are okay and alive. Now, if they fail to do so, an alert is automatically sent to a pre-registered emergency contacts, and is actually one of the most downloaded paid app in the country, which I think highlights the importance of how young people are feeling about being lonely and alone. And single person households living away from family is also growing in a lot of big cities, which is why I think some of these apps are also growing as well. And what stands out is that this approach does not wait for a crisis to happen. So Jin, like you mentioned, it's kind of a preemptive method. Yeah, it's like an emergency contact. So it creates a sort of a routine form of connection, reminding people that someone will actually notice if somebody disappears or is like out of contact for a while. So I think it is very important.
And I think you might be able to attest to this better, but I'm guessing younger people aren't actually scared of dying itself. It's more like knowing that someone's there, someone cares, there's an emergency contact.
It's like, is there someone on the other side who is aware of what is happening to me, right?
I think that's also really meaningful. So all this shows how real this fear has really become, but it's not limited to one country. It's not just limited to China. So Wonbin, how has fear of lonely death become now a global issue?
Yeah, so while the number of lonely deaths has been increasing globally, Korea's number is also steadily increasing since 2017, which is when Korea began to release the official stats for lonely deaths in Korea. And unfortunately, in 2024, which is the most recent data that we have for now, it has again reached a record high again. Now, to get a better understanding, let's take a look at the stats. So while the number, so according to the Ministry of Health and Welfare of Korea, the number of lonely deaths was 3,279 in 2020, 3,378 in 2021, 3,559 in 2022, 3,661 in 2023, and lastly, 3,924 in 2024, which is approximately an 8% increase from the previous year. Now, if we break down the stats even further, men's lonely death was 5 times more frequent than women, and they were mostly middle-aged people or seniors, and over half of them were in the lowest income group as well.
Right, so those figures reveal who's most at risk right now, and the picture is changing. So how is lonely death affecting younger generations? Usually it's associated with the elderly population.
Right, and this is, I think, quite unfortunate because as we saw in the stat Wonbin mentioned, most of it, the overall rate of lonely death is still higher among the middle-aged and older adults. But what's concerning is that the number of people in their 20s and 30s continue to rise, making this a growing social issue. And I mean, in fact, surveys have shown that people in their 30s actually perceive their own risk of dying alone at around 40%, which actually made it the highest among all age groups. And another worrying trend is the cause of death. The younger of the age group, the higher the proportion of death related to suicide. Now, among lonely death cases, suicide actually accounts for almost 60% of people in their 20s, which is very, very sad because this is the youngest age group, and about 43% in their 30s. Now, this suggests that for many young adults, lonely death isn't just about living alone. It is closely tied to mental health struggles, social isolation, and I think a lack of support system during some of the most unstable years of life, especially in those 20s. If you look at the rate of suicide, it's not so much a cause of illness or physical ailment. It is, I think, has to do with a lot of mentality and loneliness that comes with it. Yeah.
Right, I mean, the fact that people in their 30s are making up the biggest portion is quite significant. And it challenges the idea that it's not only, it's only an older age issue. So What's driving this overall rise? Why are lonely deaths increasing?
So again, the Ministry of Health and Welfare explained this with a few reasons, starting with the rise of single-person households and the aging society. And moreover, they also mentioned the loss of connection between people and neighbors due to digitalization of the world and the implementation of many contactless services such as delivery and digital services since COVID-19. So it seems like it's the reasons are multiple situations combined rather than a single evil cause driving the number of lonely deaths up.
Right, so these changes are reshaping daily life, and what's noteworthy is that young people are starting to feel this shift along with the elderly population. So why are younger adults, would you say, vulnerable to lonely deaths, Jessica?
I think there are a couple of more psychological reasons. While the overall rate of lonely deaths is still higher, as we mentioned, among middle-aged and older adults, I think what's concerning is that the people in the younger age group face a lot of social issues. For instance, job pressures, trying to look for employment, and also social alienation that happens as we age. But I think one of the things that we also stand out is that we live in a society and a culture where it's difficult to ask for help. Especially when you're young, independence is sort of prioritized. So reaching out for help becomes almost difficult. So for a lot of young adults and young people, they sort of hold on to their mental issues, hold on to their social issues, and let it breed until it gets to a point of no return.
Right, so it sounds like many young people are isolated long before anyone notices, and that suggests a clear gap in current prevention efforts. So to gain a global perspective on this, we're going to talk to someone in Japan where lonely deaths are also considered a social epidemic. And that conversation will take place right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is June Choi, who lives in Japan, a country also known for battling a lonely deaths crisis. Hello, June. Thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Hi, honored to be here.
Okay, so I know you're also living alone, so you're the best person to ask this question. So how serious would you say is the issue of lonely deaths in Japan today?
Based on my experience in living in Japan, I would say lonely death is very real and is an increasingly serious social issue that we have here. It's not openly talked about in conversations, but we do see it quite frequently in the news. I believe this issue is increasing public awareness. Well, as we see a lot of news cases of elderly people unfortunately passing away alone in their homes and were discovered much later. But the more unfortunate part is that these kind of reports, if you live in Japan, it feels very routine and common. Like this sense of normalization really shows how widespread this issue actually is. And Japan, at the end of the day, is a very rapidly aging society like Korea, and the number in single-person households are continuously increasing. So if I were to conclude, I would say lonely deaths are not just an individual circumstance that happens in this country anymore. I feel like it reflects a broader social isolation and also weakening community connections in modern-day Japan.
Thank you for sharing your insight, because as you talked about, normally lonely death was associated with elderly or the older age group. But as you saw in the episode today, we're talking about how it affects younger people as well. So how big of a concern are lonely death among young people in Japan?
I would say the issue itself is quite big, but the concerns that young people have in Japan are relatively small. When we see the actual cases of lonely deaths in the news, it is much more common among the elderly, and youth cases are somewhat rare in Japan. So I feel like some youth consider themselves as not the main group that are affected by this and could lead to lack of awareness or seriousness. But when it comes to the conditions that could lead to lonely deaths, I think it could potentially derive from life habits among young people in Japan. A lot of young adults move to larger cities like Tokyo for work and school and are living alone in small apartments. Despite living in densely populated areas, I think socially and culturally, it is very unusual to have social interaction with neighbors. And not just that, if you're living in Japan, you can't avoid the work-centered lifestyle. Long working hours and strong focus on work could possibly limit their social interaction outside the workplace. And for some colleagues, for some people, colleagues may be the only contact that they have on a daily basis. So if I were to summarize, I think lonely death overall is still quite rare from young people in Japan, and that could lead to lack of awareness. But there is this quiet and hidden isolation that exists, and that's why I believe these social tendencies in Japan could lead to this unfortunate phenomenon.
It's interesting to hear how similar Japan is to Korea right now. Now, last question for you. What kinds of policies or systems are in place in Japan to prevent lonely deaths?
I was able to do a bit of research, and based on my understanding, Japan does introduce a lot of various prevention measures on a local government and community level. For example, municipalities operate this mimamori, or best translated as watchover services that assist elderly residents with regular check-ins by community volunteers, local welfare offices, and technological support like smart meters that can detect unusual inactivity. Although this issue is being tackled when it comes to older populations, from a young person's perspective, it feels very limited in scope and is not really visible in daily life. And the support for isolated young people is not really common. And for us, it's kind of unclear where to turn for help in case of an emergency. And although awareness is gradually increasing, the current measures kind of focus responding after isolation is somewhat already severe. So that's why I feel like there is a strong need in Japan to have preventive approaches that encourage everyday social connection to people of all ages so that they can get more engaged with their communities.
I mean, yeah, it's quite interesting to hear how, because the same problems exist in Korea too, where there's not enough preventive efforts and most of the systems are geared towards elderly people. So I guess we know where the discussions should be held on. So thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we just heard from someone who lives in Japan about the seriousness of the lonely deaths crisis, the issue of lonely deaths among younger people, and the preventive policies and systems in place to address this problem. So South Korea's government is also taking the steps to address this. So what measures are being taken to prevent lonely deaths here in Korea, Jessica?
Yep, so in South Korea, in response to the rising numbers, the government has recently introduced a, quote, lonely death crisis response system. And this system is designed to identify people at risk much earlier, like we talked about, preemptive and preventive, especially those who may have previously been outside of the radar, and connect them with counseling, monitoring, and preventive support before isolation becomes life-threatening or at the point of no return.
So there's a clear need to address lonely deaths as a broader social issue, but there's still more to be done. So what more is being done to expand lonely death prevention efforts?
Now, outside of the government programs, there are also some private programs as well. For example, there's a milk delivery campaign where people volunteer and visit elderly and check in with them while delivering milk for free. It's a very soft way to soften the visit from checking if you're alive or checking if you're okay to building a genuine connection as a human to human. However, for these private programs and campaigns, there are limits due to resources and time. And also, like we just talked about throughout the interview, it's a little bit more geared towards the elderly. So for the younger generations, we do feel a little bit left out in terms of these campaigns or programs.
But I guess, as you mentioned earlier in the show, after COVID, there's an increase in contactless interactions. So I guess that is something to help with that at the same time. So the milk delivery campaign is a thoughtful way to check on the elderly, but the system, as Wonbi mentioned, is still limited to the elderly population. So what additional efforts are needed to prevent lonely deaths, especially for youths, in your opinion, Jessica?
You know, today's episode actually brought a lot of thoughts for me because I never actually thought about lonely death as a young population. But I think ultimately, we need a system that don't just respond after something happens, but one that can actively check in. And I think this could mean expanding mental health access because those are the main cause of young death, creating low barrier counseling and building a community space where people actually can come without the stigma or pressure just to connect and talk to people. But I think beyond policy, there's also a social responsibility that we need to talk about, and I think it's to normalize reaching out and calling out for help, because I'm also one of those people, but sometimes it's really difficult to say, hey, I just need a moment of your time, or like I need some help, because we are taught to be more independent, especially in a hyper-competitive society where independence is something prioritized, and this mentality of standing on your 2 feet is something that we should grow into. But I think when we live in a society, the whole point is to be able to rely on someone and also offer help and support. So I hope we can build that society so that lonely death doesn't become too lonely at the end of the day. Yeah.
Well, you know what, Cheska? I'm always available for you to reach out. If you need anyone to talk to, I'm always here.
Yes. This is the reason why we should talk about it openly, yeah.
Raise awareness.
Yes, well, can I contact you too? You haven't said it.
Of course. I'm here as well, don't worry.
I'm kidding. Thank you, though. Thanks.
And one way to talk about how or get ideas of how to deal with this problem is to see how other countries are tackling the problem. So what are some systems that you think can be applied to Korea that's being done overseas?
Yeah, so I've brought some of the more traditional examples because although we just discussed that it's important to support the isolated youth as well, but I think as a government, as a society, it is inevitable for the seniors and the elderlies to be the priority. So I was hoping that if Korea is able to implement and build a strong foundational support for the elderlies, it will naturally lead to other programs and campaigns that will help the youths as well. So in terms to build the foundation for the seniors and elderlies, I brought some examples that we can benchmark. In France, there is an organization called Mona Lisa, which is the name Mona Lisa, but apparently it's actually an acronym for certain words as well, which calls and visits isolated single-person households. And in Denmark, they actually utilize residential communities to prevent people from being isolated and living alone. And overall, I think, like I mentioned at the beginning, I think Korea has a lot of room for improvement in terms of program, welfare campaigns to support the elderly, and furthermore to support the youth as well.
Right, so living alone is becoming more common, but no one should have to face life or death alone. From government systems to community programs, meaningful efforts are already underway, but more is clearly needed. We must strengthen support networks, create inclusive prevention policies, and make a habit of checking in on our neighbors and those around us. By staying connected and taking responsibility as a community, we can hopefully prevent lone deaths. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Cheska.
This is always mine. Thank you.
And also Wonbin.
Thank you for having me.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. And we hope you check on your loved ones today. So we are News Generation.
해금은 두 줄로 된 한 악기인데 저도 처음에 시작하게 된 거는 그 두 줄에서 너무 다양한 소리가 나오는 게 너무 신기했고 일단 해금이 되게 사람의 목소리랑 좀 비슷하다고 많이들 하세요. 줄을 눌러서 이렇게 음을 계속 왔다 갔다 진동하는 그런 형태를 띠고 있다 보니까 애절하다라고 많이 말씀을 해주시는 것 같아요. 이 곡은